Buongiorno, amici della fisarmonica. Yesterday, I presented my clef system. In video 15A, I introduced System C Clef Notation. I showed you how I have my own clefs and their counterparts to the old traditional clefs. And here's some more. I showed you that. And I also told you that my clefs can be C clefs that are high or low. The C clefs that are high, that's the default clefs, have the number, the pitch indicator in the space that's the third space from the bottom. And that indicates that the pitch for this one, for example, would be C1, the pitch for this C2, and so forth. The System C low clefs have the pitch indicator written in the second space from the bottom. And as an example, this one here would indicate that any notes written on this space would be the tone C4. And then here's the rest of them. Okay, so each C clef that goes from C1 to C8 can be a high or a low. I think you can see that. Now, here's a better, bigger example. For example, here's a C5 clef. This is the clef indicator, this piece. It shows you that it's clearly a C. And this is the pitch indicator. I mentioned that. So you see, this pitch indicator number tells you that that tone that sounded when you play a written note in this space will be a C5. And also, with my clef, the top arm and the bottom arm of the C figure lie precisely where the first ledger lines would be below and above the stave or the staff. So you see here, if this is positioned precisely at the first ledger line below the staff itself, this would indicate that this is a C4. Any note written on this line would be a C4. So my clefs will indicate two C's, one here and one here. Okay? And it shows clearly that this C5 clef has replaced the traditional G clef or treble clef. And the G treble clef is the one that indicates where the G4 tone would be. But I've eliminated all these and I use mine. Here's a low clef. Now you see the high clefs or the regular clefs are default clefs, so you don't need to make any more notation. You see C5, you know that's a high clef. You know that's a regular C clef. This one here is a low clef, so you see it says C3 low. The low clefs, if you write them out with words, would be indicated with the word low in parentheses. Now, here's a C3 low clef. All right, and here's the old F traditional F clef, and the F traditional F clef tells you that the F3, the note would be placed on this line, and my clef tells you that the note placed in this space would be a C3. See that there? Now, it works the same way with the low clefs. Remember I told you that the high clefs will denote a C here in the space and also a C down on the bottom arm of the figure. Well, the low clefs do the same thing. The low clef will show you where the C3 is here in this space, and this top ledger line, which is part of the arm of the clef indicator, tells you where the C4 would be located. So you get the benefit of knowing where two C's are, not just one. Okay, I think I made that clear. I hope I did. And you can see it maybe a little bit more clear on here. This is a little bit bigger. You see the clef symbol is bigger. There we go. And then you have your pitch indicator. You have your clef itself, which is the clef indicator, tells you it's a C. And down here, this arm of the symbol, this bottom arm, would tell you that notes would be C4 notes if they were written on these ledger lines. And that's that. Now, first of all, you notice that I repeat a lot, and I apologize if you don't like it, because when I homeschooled our children, well, my wife and I homeschooled our children for quite a few years, we got in the habit of repeating so that they would grasp the topic at the time. So I apologize for that, but it's a habit of mine. And also, you say, Joey, why even bother? Why even do this? Nobody cares, because nowadays everything's digital, electronic. Young kids and adults can go on the computer and blah, 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 and type in stuff and press buttons, and they have a song, and it's done. And it sounds great. Everything's digital. People don't really like to read much anymore. But I'm hoping out there that somebody likes to read, likes to think about theory, and would like to possibly maybe even use my clefs, maybe even try them, just on a piece of paper. It's something to think about, and I think it's pretty cool. Now, you say, well, why even bother doing it in the first place, aside from the fact that everything's digital and we need instant gratification in this world? I say, well, the story itself, the history is unique, and it's kind of interesting, but kind of pathetic. So let me just try to tell you this here. Back in the 900s, now I read this in music history books. I had quite a few. I still have some on my bookshelf. And I'm told in the books, the history books, that somewhere in the 900s, somebody drew a red line, which meant that any notes written on that line would represent the tone F3. Or something close, because back then, tuning was screwy. And then somebody a little bit later said, you know what, I'm going to put an F in front of that line. That way you know that note will be an F. So then later in the 900s, somebody came along and says, oh, I like that F line. Let's put another line, a green line or a yellow line, and we'll let people know that anything written on that line would be a C4. So that was kind of like your second clef. This was your first clef, then they added the second one. Now the line could be yellow also, but in the examples I looked at on the internet, they were mostly green lines, so I went with green. So you see that? Then, in the late 900s, up to, let's say, 1100, I don't know when, nobody really knows. Somebody said, you know what, let's add another line, and the notes on that line will represent the tone A, that would be A3. So now you have 3 staff lines, and you have 3 crude clefs. Okay, see that there? Then in the 1100s, somebody came along and said, you know what, let's add another line, and the note written on that line, that's a black line, will denote either a D or an E, and that would be a D4 or an E4. And so now you have the initial original red line, then you have your black for A, green for C, and then another black line for D or E. But what happened over time was, now according to what I've read, is that this became pretty well established for a time, and it no longer, this top line no longer represented the D, but they stuck with the E. Okay? They stuck with the E, and then time passed, and the clefs changed, the symbols changed, and they added more lines. And that brings us to what I wanted to tell you about. Now, the beauty of it is, over all those hundreds of years, those initial designations for tones, F, A, C, E, In other words, that structure, that vertical order of tones has survived, which is pretty cool. And you could represent those original 4 notes or tones, okay, with the traditional F clef. You can do that. You can say, I'll write that down. And it would look like this. Now, you could also designate those notes, tones, by writing the notes with the traditional C alto clef, which I showed yesterday. You see that? You could write them that way. Okay, so there's 2 ways of writing those original 4 note designations with the traditional clefs. If you use my clef, hold on a second. You use my clef to denote those notes or write those notes, okay? You see it's very similar to this one here. This is a C3 low clef. So you could write those notes the same way with my clef, right? You say, well, so what? What's the difference? This is well above the staff. The notes extend above the staff, just like with the old clef. So why use yours? And I say, well, because I have 8 high clefs, regular clefs, and 8 low clefs. So I would switch here to the regular C4 clef, and with my clef, the C is always in a space. Whether it's high or low, the C is always in a space. Makes for easy reading. So you see, if you use my C4 clef, you can designate, you can write the notes down like this within the staff proper. Okay? Now, to me, that's important. You say, why bother? Who needs another clef system? Nobody cares. Well, when you write music, I have friends who are actually professionals, and they're actually professional composers, and they're wonderful. It makes my music look like crap, but when they write, there's a thing called tessitura, and that's pretty much, for a given piece of music, that's pretty much where most of the notes are. In other words, it's where most of the notes live. It's the range in which your main melody kind of stays and doesn't drift too far. So when you write notes on a piece of paper, I would think, want a clef that gives you the ability to keep your notes centered on your staff or within a decent range, you know what I mean? Something that's easy to read. And that's part of the reason why I did this. Now, there's another thing I wanted to talk about. When I showed you this, hold on a second. When I showed you these papers here, this is kind of ridiculous. It took 800 years, roughly 800 years, to go from 1 line to 5-line staff until the staff was pretty much accepted and commonplace. Like between the 16 and 1700s, this became pretty much standard, pretty much natural, regular. It took 800 years to go from 1 line to 5, and from 1 clef to 4 generally accepted or used clefs. That would be the G clef, the F clef, the C alto, and the C tenor. It took 800 years. And once the traditional clefs and staff systems were recognized and accepted, well, that's fine and dandy because that's what people use. But these clunky old things, in fact, I showed you, hold on, I showed you my other paper. Yeah, you have these different variations of the F clef and different variations of the C clef. Oh, these clunky old things have been around for over 200 years. So what's wrong with somebody trying to think of a better system, a neater system, a prettier system? And anyway, I hope that wasn't too boring. I'm just trying to say that after hundreds and hundreds of years, it doesn't hurt to try something new, and it would be nice if somebody actually looked at it and said, you know what, I'd like to write that down and try that. And maybe even make it better. Maybe even make it even better. I think it's excellent, but time will tell. Okay, I hope I didn't take too long. Thanks for listening, and I think I can move on now to scales and chords, and then once in a while come back and do a song, show you some chords. Just simple stuff. I don't do the complicated stuff. I'm not a professional. Okay, that's it. Thank you for being patient, and maybe we'll see you again. Good night.